On the day of the Smith and Lynn family's engagement banquet, Nick Lynn eloped with his first love, and a video of them passionately kissing went viral. He caressed his first love's waist and said to the camera, "I prefer a woman who's a bit more obedient." Not to be outdone, I grabbed a man at random and announced the change of my fiancé on the spot. What a coincidence, I prefer a man who's a bit bigger. That night, Nick's video call came through, and he was furious. "If you apologize and clarify, the position of Mrs. Lynn is still yours." A rough hand reached out and knocked my phone away. The usually restrained tycoon of the capital was visibly upset. His gold-rimmed glasses askew, and several buttons of his shirt torn off, equally furious. "Using me and then tossing me aside? Don't you like that I'm bigger?" Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The auspicious time had passed, but Nick hadn't shown up, and everyone was looking for him. Suddenly, Mr. Lynn's secretary shouted, "Young master is trending." My phone vibrated, and I opened the notification to see a video. At the bustling airport arrival gate, Nick had one arm around Gloria's waist and the other holding her face, kissing her passionately. He is the eldest son of the Lynn family, and the engagement between the Lynn and Smith families had the whole city's attention. The entertainment reporters, who were waiting for celebrities at the airport, quickly turned their cameras to focus on the passionately kissing couple. "Mr. Lynn, today is your engagement day with Miss Smith." Gloria's face turned pale, and she quickly tried to stand up from Nick's embrace. Nick pulled her back into his arms forcefully. "Being Mrs. Lynn is just a title. If Vera Smith wants it, she can have it. But I prefer a woman who's a bit more obedient. Too wild, it's inappropriate." Nick's words felt like a loud slap across my face. The 20-plus years of growing up together turned into a joke. The Lynn and Smith families had been friends for generations. I was beautiful, wild, and unruly. After studying abroad, I returned and started the most exclusive club in the capital on my own. Every day was busy but enjoyable. Mrs. Lynn had hinted that such public exposure was inappropriate for me. Before I could respond, Nick stood in front of me. "Vera can do whatever she wants. I'll bear her responsibilities." Because of this, I was instantly moved by him and didn't object to our arranged marriage. During the summer after high school graduation, Nick had a first love. In just a month or two, Mrs. Lynn intervened, and they quickly broke up. Teenage infatuation, it's natural. I didn't mind it. I believed Nick had a clear life plan. An arranged marriage was the best choice for both the Lynn and Smith families. Until a few days before the engagement ceremony, I saw messages on Nick's phone that he sent to Gloria. "Gloria, I'm about to marry someone I don't love. Come back and see me." Mrs. Lynn frowned as she stood in front of me, her phone repeatedly playing the video of Nick and Gloria together. "Vera, I warned you a long time ago that women shouldn't show themselves in public. Now look, you've embarrassed the Lynn family along with you." Quickly, I held back my parents who were about to explode. I curled my lips into a smile and walked up to the stage. After seeing that message last night, I was already prepared. It would be best if Nick didn't leave, but if he did, I wouldn't mind changing my engagement partner. On stage, I scanned the crowd and saw a tall, handsome figure with a pair of sharp, hawk-like eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. A forget-me-not flower was pinned on his white shirt as he looked steadily at me. I didn't expect my brother to find such a high-quality actor for me. "Sorry for the delay, the male lead just got here because of a traffic jam." I smiled at the man. "Welcome, everyone, to the engagement banquet of my beloved and me." Mr. and Mrs. Lynn's faces changed instantly as they stood up. Amid the buzzing discussions, the man stood up, walked through the crowd step by step, and came to my side on the stage. His imposing presence gave me enough face. I smiled and hooked my arm around his, whispering, "Great performance, I'll ask my brother to give you a raise." Then, I slightly raised my chin and smiled triumphantly at Mrs. Lynn. "What a coincidence, I prefer a man who's a bit bigger." The whole room erupted instantly. "Vera Smith, are you planning to exhaust the relationship between our two families?" Mrs. Lynn didn't expect me to dump her son at the engagement banquet, giving the Lynn family a hard slap in the face. She turned to confront my parents, but I suddenly felt a sense of joy as if I was about to break free from my restraints. I cut off her impending questions. Mrs. Lynn, it's your precious son who disregarded the relationship between our families. By the way, a little advertisement. The V Club has just received a new batch of models, both male and female. As an apology, tonight everything is on the house. You're all welcome. Cheers erupted from the crowd below as I smiled and left the stage with the man. The news of the Smith family's daughter changing her fiancé on the spot quickly topped the trending searches. It firmly suppressed the news of Nick and his first love eloping and kissing. Amid Mrs. Lynn's curses, I happily entered the inner room of the lounge. The dress was complicated, and after several attempts to unzip it from the back, I was about to call someone in when long, slightly calloused fingers touched my back, holding my fingers and unzipping the dress. I immediately realized it was a hand belonging to someone noble and accustomed to handling guns. Where did my brother find such a remarkable man? Why haven't you left yet? I felt a pang of anxiety, sensing danger. Tonight is our engagement banquet. It's fake, I retorted, trying to get him to leave. But the man leisurely helped me out of the dress. Although his gaze wasn't invasive, the calluses on his fingertips grazing my skin made me feel hot all over. I looked at the man in the mirror, my gaze uncontrollably trailing down his lean waist. Yes, definitely bigger. I quickly averted my eyes and changed into my little black dress. The meticulously tailored little black dress perfectly hugged my body, accentuating all the right places without an ounce of excess flesh, with a deep V in the back almost reaching my waist. The man's eyes lowered, falling on my waist, his gaze gradually darkening. My phone suddenly buzzed incessantly, and I turned to check it as a tactical move. I almost crashed the app with the flood of messages. Hashtag explosive Smith Brown Alliance. Hashtag explosive the capital's abstinent tycoon prefers wild hot woman. Hashtag explosive Brown. Seriously, how does Vera Smith have the qualifications to get engaged to the tycoon? Wasn't it supposed to be a Smith-Lynn alliance? So the tycoon picked up the leftovers from Nick. Am I the only one who noticed? Did Miss Smith imply that Nick is small? As I scrolled further, the app crashed and wouldn't open again. You're William Brown? I never would have thought he was the tycoon of the Brown family who had always lived with the Italian godfather. Why did he come back to the country? Although my Smith family is prestigious, it can't compare to the Brown family. Unable to understand why my brother arranged forget-me-not flowers for this man, I could only apologize first. Sorry, Mr. Brown, I mistook you for someone else. Miss Smith, your excuse is rather outdated. I immediately felt a headache. To the tycoon, it probably seemed like I was trying to seduce him with a lame trick. Really sorry, I'll hold a press conference to clear your name. Additionally, the V Club will provide you with the world's only lifetime VIP gold card, and I'll cover all your expenses. But who would have thought the tycoon would be even more upset? He looked at me with cold eyes and casually loosened his tie. Miss Smith, are you planning to use me and then throw me away? My headache grew worse. That night, the club was extraordinarily lively. With all the coming and going, I was feeling a bit tipsy. I planned to go to the small garden to get some fresh air. Turning the corner with a heavy head and light feet, I bumped into someone. My nose hurt from the collision, and I looked up pitifully to see a chiseled face. His hair was neatly combed back, a pair of gold-rimmed glasses perched on his straight nose, and his eyes behind the lenses were coldly looking at me. After searching all night for this face, I would recognize it even if he turned into a ghost. This man was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, raised by the elder Mr. Brown, always meticulous and rule-abiding. After a kidnapping incident in his childhood, he was taken to Italy by his godfather for a few years. Unlike the other second-generation rich kids in the capital, he didn't pick up any bad habits. He was both rigid and vengeful. Thinking of the unpleasant encounter in the lounge and now his cold gaze that could freeze the air around us. My brain sounded the alarm, and I took 2 steps back, drunkenly sizing him up. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, even in high heels, I only reached his chin. Broad shoulders, long legs, a well-fitted white shirt buttoned up to the top. His well-formed pectoral muscles created a pleasing curve under the shirt. My gaze slid down to the expensive cufflinks perfectly fastened at his wrists. His long fingers were elegantly shaped. Fueled by alcohol, I impulsively reached out to touch the pectoral muscles in front of me. My fair, rounded fingers with bright red nail polish contrasted with the slightly raised muscles under the white shirt. The texture felt good. I looked up at him, my eyes sparkling. "Dear, you just hit my nose and it hurt." The muscles under my fingers instantly tensed up, and I smiled as I saw a blush quietly creeping up his earlobes. The bodyguard behind him took 2 steps forward. "Miss Smith, please behave yourself." The Brown family's bodyguards were notoriously strict, so I sensibly let go and stepped back. A breeze blew through the corridor, and goosebumps rose on my bare shoulders. William Brown frowned and motioned for me to come closer. I beamed and quickly stepped forward, wrapping my arm around his neck, my pointed high heels lightly brushing against his calf. William's body stiffened, and he frowned, removing my hand from his neck. He took the coat from the bodyguard and draped it over my shoulders, pulling it tight to wrap me up snugly. I lifted my face to give him a seductive thank you. But he had already walked past me, taking the bodyguard with him. Such a temper. But it seems the press conference won't be necessary. The next day, I wore a proper suit, my long hair styled into a bun, and followed my brother into the conference room of Brown Group. William walked into the conference room, saw me, and his face darkened. "Mr. Smith, today is the last meeting before the project signing. Are you sure you want to change your team members?" My brother stood up anxiously, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. According to convention, changing the team member is not a commercial taboo. This is also why my brother agreed to bring me. No one expected William's reaction to be so intense. I pinched my thigh hard, forcing myself to calm down. "Mr. Brown, the optimized plan from our company can reduce the original price by 2%. May I have the time to present it to you?" William stopped in his tracks and turned to look at me. Under the table, I tightly held my brother's hand, my palm sweaty. He was more nervous than I was, afraid I would quote the wrong price or mess things up. William quietly looked at me, neither agreeing nor refusing. After a while, I began to have trouble breathing, and finally, William walked back to his seat and signaled for me to start. My brother plopped back into his chair. I tightly gripped the keychain in my hand and stood up to present my new plan. 20 minutes passed, and the presentation ended. The conference room was silent, and everyone looked at William. William's fingers rhythmically tapped on the table, and my heart followed suit, beating erratically. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity. William nodded. "Sign it." My legs went weak, and I almost fell. Quickly grabbing the conference table, the keychain in my hand fell, making a crisp sound on the table. He glanced deeply at the keychain, then got up and left. I grabbed the bag from the chair and ran out. William, with his tall stature and long legs, walked quickly. "Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown." I chased after him with the bag, and the secretary made a token attempt to stop me before letting me through. William had already taken off his coat and was sitting properly behind the large desk. White shirt, gold-rimmed glasses, hair meticulously combed back. Just like he had been directly copied and pasted from the night before. I placed the bag on his desk. "Thank you for your coat, Mr. Brown. I had it dry cleaned." I suddenly felt a bit nostalgic for my club with its bizarre lighting. Even with the same abstinent face, in the bright daylight, I couldn't muster any romantic thoughts. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Brown, I won't disturb you any longer. I look forward to working with the Brown Group." With that, I turned and walked out. With my hand on the doorknob, I heard William's voice behind me. "You look better with your hair down." On the way home, I sat in the back seat with my brother, who was fidgeting and hesitant to speak. He wanted to scold me for my recklessness but couldn't bring himself to say anything harsh. I smiled. "Were you scared?" He reached out and patted my head without saying a word. "Brother, did you forget? I've always been the smartest kid in the family. If I set my mind to it, there's nothing I can't accomplish." I reached up, loosened my hair bun, and let my long hair fall down, smiling at my brother. "Brother, William Brown said I look better with my hair down." "Vera." My brother frowned. I was silent for a moment before speaking to him again. I will never again put myself in a position where others can decide my fate. Since the dinner has already been arranged, I'm going to the table to eat. I would never again endure the humiliation inflicted by the Lynn family. Nick had completely washed his hands of the matter, cutting off contact with us and disappearing without a trace, enjoying his life somewhere. The Smith and Lynn families were pretty much done with each other. The Lynn family looked down on my parents, treating them with disdain. My parents felt the same way about them. But because of deep business ties, neither side could afford to make a clean break, leading to rumors that I still had feelings for Nick and that Tycoon William had quietly withdrawn. I felt like someone was out to get me. I had planned to invest more time in building a relationship with the Brown group, but I ended up hiding in the club for some peace and quiet. That night, with nothing to do, I sat in a booth drooling over a male model's abs. He played along, showering me with attention. The lobby manager came over and told me that William was here, waiting for me in VIP room 888. A chill ran down my spine. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the VIP room were one-way glass. You could see the hall from the room, but not the other way around. I quickly wiped my mouth, grabbed a shawl to wrap myself up, and knocked on the door of room 888. William was the only one inside, standing by the window, looking at the booth where I had just been sitting. Same white shirt, gold-rimmed glasses. The difference was that his shirt sleeves were rolled up, showing off his beautifully toned forearms. I'm a sucker for good looks. I swallowed hard. Hearing the door open, William turned to look at me. His gaze fell on my carefully styled long curls, then moved down to the shawl that wrapped me tightly. He slightly curved his lips. He was smiling. This was a direct hit to a sucker for good looks like me. I blinked and leaned weakly against the armrest of the sofa, crossing my legs. "Mr. Brown, please don't smile, I can't handle it." William's smile deepened. "Help." He even had dimples. "What will happen if Miss Smith can't handle it?" The room had excellent soundproofing, and in the enclosed space with just the two of us, William's presence enveloped me. His voice was low and husky, resonating in my mind. I kicked off my high heels, threw away the shawl, and walked barefoot to William. I looked up at him. I saw his earlobes turn red and his Adam's apple bob. I pulled my long hair in front of my chest, covering the exposed skin, and smiled at him. "If Miss Smith can't handle it, she'll devour you." William's face turned red, and he took a step back. "Quite pure, huh?" I followed him, but tripped over myself and fell forward. Unsurprisingly, I landed in an extremely comfortable embrace. My lipstick left a bright red mark on his white shirt. William's whole body stiffened, and he opened his arms, trying to help me stand. I wrapped my arms around his waist, finding a comfortable position in his embrace, and looked up at him. "Mr. Brown, you have my perfume on you. I can't move anymore." William looked down at me for so long that I almost thought he was going to kiss me. He tightened his grip, lifted me up by the waist, and carried me to the sofa, sitting down. I took the opportunity to straddle him. William sighed and wrapped his arms around me. His hand gently covered my bare back, his palm scorching hot. In that moment, I lost all reason. He was William Brown, the most dominant man in the city. I reached up, wrapped my arms around his neck, and lightly sucked on his earlobe. When the phone rang, I was already a puddle in William's arms. I didn't want to answer, but the caller was persistent, calling one after another. I straightened up, grabbed the phone, swiped to answer, and put it on speaker, tossing it aside. I looked at William. His meticulously styled hair was a mess, his gold-rimmed glasses askew, and the white shirt he wore had 3 buttons torn off by me. His beautifully shaped chest muscles were covered with my lipstick marks, rising and falling with his heavy breaths. I raised my gaze and met his deep, intense eyes. "Vera Smith, you've upset my parents so much and haven't come to apologize for days. Are you planning not to marry me?" Nick's voice came through the speaker. I was taken aback. I had almost forgotten about this person. William's expression darkened. Nick continued. "I'm giving you a chance. Right now, immediately, bring gifts and come apologize to my parents. The position of Mrs. Lynn is still yours." I found it laughable. "Nick Lynn, haven't you seen the trending news? That night, I got engaged to another man. I will never be Mrs. Lynn. Nick's voice grew angrier. Vera, you must be joking, right? Be sensible. I'm a successful man, it's normal to have some women around. Recognize this fact before marriage, and you'll live happier. I laughed, reached for the phone. Mr. Lynn, I remember you said you like obedient women. There's something I should tell you in person. Mr. Lynn, I prefer a man who's a bit bigger. After finishing, I hung up the phone amidst Nick's furious demands for clarification and apology. Leaned down and pressed against William through the thin black lace. I thought everything would fall into place. Unexpectedly, at the last moment, William, with his strong willpower, pushed me away. His face was flushed, veins bulging on his neck. It was clear he was enduring great discomfort. I looked at him, puzzled. He wrapped me tightly in his coat, holding me close through it. Vera, I want to save our first time for after we get married. If you're willing to marry me. Something exploded in my mind. I jumped up from him. With an obvious sign of resistance, William's face turned cold, almost looking at me with anger. Are you planning to use me and then discard me again? Don't you like bigger men? The room was still filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. But the relationship between William and I quickly cooled down. Wrapped in William's coat, I sat on the sofa and lit a cigarette. We faced each other through the curling smoke, in silent confrontation. After a while, William sighed, took the cigarette from my fingers, and extinguished it. Vera, can't you forget Nick Lynn? Expressionless, I lit another one. Mr. Brown, you should have heard about Nick and me, right? No lingering feelings. I just don't want to be anyone's accessory anymore. The circle is so small. I want to be the one making decisions at the table. As Vera Smith. And not as anyone's wife. William looked at me through the smoke for a long, long time. A cigarette burned out, and the smoke dispersed. William took my hand. Vera, let me help you. You can stand on my shoulders and see the world. My brother began to personally guide me, introducing me to the core business of the group. I intentionally aimed to separate the businesses of the Lynn and Smith families. Their businesses had been intertwined for over a decade or two, and untangling them wasn't an easy task. I became increasingly busy. William, as he said he would, guided me step by step. Whenever I encountered a hurdle, I could always turn to him for answers. One ordinary night, I was nestled in William's office. He was signing documents while I buried myself in studying professional knowledge. The office was quiet when he suddenly spoke up. I'm planning to acquire the Lynn Group. Ah. Immersed in my studies, I didn't immediately react. He seriously repeated. I'm planning to acquire the Lynn Group. Why? My plan was to completely separate the Lynn and Smith groups, each going their own way. William's fingers gently tapped the desk. Now I knew this was his way of thinking. The Lynn Group is about to hit a crisis. The channels they've established over decades are very valuable to your family. In front of William, my brain always seemed a bit slow. What benefit does this bring to the Brown Group? Under the warm light, William's earlobes quietly reddened. Vera, if you want to take control, I'll support you. I'll help you achieve your goal, and then you can seriously consider whether to marry me. Nick hosted a grand birthday party for Gloria at my club. Almost all the second-generation elites in our circle attended. A cake tower was pushed onto the stage, and rose petals floated down from above. Gloria was moved to tears, hugging Nick tightly and crying loudly. Nick held Gloria tightly, his eyes piercing through the cheering crowd, directly looking at me below the stage. I was nestled in a booth, holding a cigarette, quickly calculating on my phone's calculator. There were so many things to worry about with the acquisition of the Lynn Group. It was too noisy, so I got up to get some fresh air in the small garden. My mind was still racing with thoughts about the acquisition. At that moment, a hand landed on my bare shoulder. I jumped up, reflexively raising my hand and giving a slap. Smack! The crisp sound of the slap echoed, and Nick's face visibly swelled. Vera Smith, are you out of your mind? Nick roared at me, clutching his face. I took 2 steps back, coldly staring at his right hand. If there's a next time, I won't mind cutting it off. Nick laughed angrily. Vera, you dress like this every day at the club, Who knows what dealings you have in secret? If others can touch you, why can't I? I'm the only one who can tolerate your daily pretense of being high and mighty. Name your price, let me also taste the pleasure of the club's owner. I was shocked, almost unable to believe my ears. I could accept that he was still hung up on his first love. But in my heart, he always carried the filter of my youth. I always remembered that small boy who stood in front of me. He firmly said that Vera could do anything she wanted. Why? I murmured, why have you become like this? Nick, holding his swollen face, said viciously. Don't talk to me about true love. I once had true love, but wasn't it torn apart by my mother for the sake of power? Do you know how painful it is to endure your wildness while still having to defend you in front of everyone? Why can't you just accept reality and obediently be my family's canary? Obediently let me swallow the Smith group. One wrong move, and all is lost. I suddenly felt relieved. I remembered that day at the engagement banquet when I called myself an idiot. I couldn't help but laugh. Nick Lynn, here's a word for you. Idiot! After 3 months, the acquisition of the Lynn Group was finally settled. On the day the contract was signed, I accompanied William. Nick followed behind his father, looking defeated. When he saw me sitting next to William, Nick became agitated. Vera Smith. How could you be so heartless? Our families have been friends for decades, and you actually want to swallow up the Lynn Group. I pointed at William and said to Nick, Mr. Lynn, please wake up. The one acquiring the Lynn Group is Mr. Brown. If you are really unhappy, blame him. William turned to look at me, a faint smile in his eyes, dimples appearing at the corners of his mouth. I suddenly felt dizzy. Damn it, he's tempting me again. Mr. Lynn said nothing, signed his name on the contract, and pushed it to William. William turned and pushed the folder and pen in front of me. Vera, you sign. Huh? I was shocked. Even a broken ship has 3,000 nails. No matter how bad the Lynn Group is, it's still worth over $2 billion. I pointed at myself and asked him uncertainly. Me, sign? William nodded. Yes. You sign. It's a gift for you. Without another word, I picked up the pen and quickly signed my name. Obediently, I pushed the folder back to William and joked him. Mr. Brown, such a big gift, I have nothing to repay you with. If nothing else works, I'll repay you with my body. The usually cold and serious Mr. Brown, in front of the full conference room, leaned over and hugged me. Vera, I only want you to be happy. The defeat was complete. After selling the Lynn Group, the Lynn family collapsed at an astonishing speed. First, Mr. Lynn's illegitimate son came back to fight for the property. Mrs. Lynn couldn't bear the blow and fell ill. Nick was in a slump, deeply addicted to gambling, losing all the remaining money, and piling up debts. Hearing these things from my parents, there was nothing left but sighs. I never expected that Nick would go crazy and kidnap me. When I woke up, my hands and feet were tied, lying on the edge of a cliff, unable to move. Below was the deep, bottomless sea. Nick sat not far from me, surrounded by empty wine bottles and cigarette butts. My scalp tingled, and I tried to reason with him. Nick Lynn, don't act rashly. Whatever you want, just tell me. I'll agree to everything. Nick took a big gulp of wine and put his index finger to his lips. Shoo! Vera, don't make noise. Let's wait together and see if William Brown will come to save you. William! A chill ran up my spine. Nick, what have you done to William? Nick laughed sinisterly. I cut his car's brake line. If he's in a hurry to save you, he'll definitely speed. The road from downtown is full of twists and turns. By then. Boom! I'll send you both on your way. The chill spread from my heart to my limbs, and I gasped for breath, afraid that I would faint from panic. Nick, no, please no. Whatever you want, I'll agree to it. Just call William, call him and stop him. I screamed hysterically, my voice breaking from extreme fear. But Nick understood. He threw away the wine bottle, staggered towards me. He squatted in front of me, pinching my chin. Anything? I was trembling with fear. I closed my eyes and bit down hard on my tongue. The sharp pain exploded, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. I finally managed to stay conscious. Yes, whatever you want, I'll agree to it. Nick pinched my chin, forcing me to look at him. Then, I want you. To die under a peony flower, even as a ghost, one would be amorous. Anyway, I never planned to live. Just grant me this one wish. I closed my eyes, tears slipping from the corners. I agree. Call William. Call him now. Nick took out his phone, turned it on, and dialed William's number. Beep, beep. In the damp sea breeze, the ringing sounded like a death knell. He called 3 times in a row, but no one answered. Nick shrugged. Maybe he's already waiting for you on the road to the underworld. The fear peaked. I didn't care about anything, opened my mouth, and bit down hard on Nick's hand that was in front of me. Nick screamed in pain, slapping me wildly, but I held on, refusing to let go. I tore a piece of flesh off his hand. Nick clutched his wounded hand, his face pale, sweating profusely. Crazy, you're damn crazy. I spat out the flesh, glaring at him, and said word by word. Nick Lynn. On the road to the underworld, I'll recognize you by this wound. Nick had already lost his mind. I knew I might not be able to escape. The wound was bleeding, and my consciousness began to fade. In my daze, William's voice seemed to come from a distant horizon. Vera! Vera! Wake up! Please, wake up! I struggled to open my eyes and saw the blurry image of William. Even like this, I could see his face covered in blood. William, you're really waiting for me on the road to the afterlife. I reached out and tried to touch his chest. What a pity. Such a beautiful body, I didn't get to enjoy it before dying. I wonder if there are hotels on the road to the afterlife. Even an hour would be good. Maybe even half an hour would be enough. There was stifled laughter around us. I suddenly woke up. The sensation in my palm was warm. To hell with the road to the afterlife. In front of me was the living, breathing William. A major embarrassing moment. I closed my eyes and pretended to be dead. Without a doubt, I married William. Throughout the wedding ceremony, we appeared for only 10 minutes. Reciting vows, saying I do, exchanging rings. Then we were sent to the bridal chamber. Seeing the chest muscles under the white shirt for the first time, I was absolutely captivated. I straddled him directly, running my hands up and down. High-end. Simply too high-end. William's body was burning hot, his face flushed to the roots of his neck. Even his chest muscles were tinged with a faint red. I suddenly frowned. Honey, there's something poking me again. Didn't you say you like it big? Is it big enough? You'll only know after trying. Extra story, William's perspective. My parents were victims of a power struggle. They both died in a car accident. I was raised by my grandfather from a young age. Grandfather was very powerful. He founded Brown Group and developed it into the largest conglomerate in the capital circle. He was also very strict, demanding a lot from me, so I could only grow up the way he wanted. It was hard for him to bury his own child, and I understood his pain. So I never disobeyed him. When I was 6, I couldn't bear the high-pressure studying anymore, so I sneaked out of the house while the tutor wasn't looking. At the fountain in the square, I saw a little girl who looked like a beautiful doll. She was squatting there, looking a bit lost. She said she had an agreement with her parents to go out and play for a day by herself and then return home on her own. No servants from home were allowed to follow. But she couldn't find her way home. Her eyes were as bright as stars. I envied her so much. How could there be a child in this world who could play freely and indulgently for a whole day? Didn't she have to learn 8 foreign languages? Didn't she have to read financial magazines? I made a promise to her that she should grow up happily. I also promised to grow up into an excellent adult to protect her happiness. That day, I took her to her doorstep and left my keychain with her. I said it was our token, our secret. Later, I grew up step by step. I became excellent step by step. But there was already someone else by her side. It didn't matter, I promised to protect her happiness. I went to her engagement party. I waited in the VIP room on the second floor to witness her happiness. But that man didn't show up. I was curious about what this willful little girl would do, and then my bodyguard intercepted an actor holding forget-me-nots. That was her favorite flower. I had the actor detained, took his forget-me-nots, and sat in his place. Then she announced on stage that her fiancé had changed. She looked at me. At that moment, my heart pounded. I walked onto the stage, let her hold my arm, and watched her tell everyone with a radiant smile that it was our engagement party. She told everyone that the entire club was free for the night. I was very pleased. My little girl was still being herself, free and unrestrained. But soon, I couldn't smile anymore. She used me and then discarded me. We parted on bad terms. With the size of the Brown family, people always begged me to discuss business. I said where to meet, and that's where we met. That night, I inexplicably chose the club as the meeting place. After finishing business, she bumped into me, drunkenly wrapping her arms around my neck. I was almost overwhelmed by the immense happiness. I wanted so much to wrap my coat around her and take her home. But I couldn't scare my little girl again. I never expected to see her again the next day. She was wearing a business suit, looking like a child playing dress-up, utterly adorable. I knew she wanted to grow up. My little girl, I didn't know if I would be the one to accompany her to old age. If she wanted to grow up, I would teach her, step by step, to become the adult she wanted to be. She was very smart and did an even better job optimizing the plan than I had imagined. When the keychain in her hand fell out, happiness almost drowned me. My little girl, she still remembered me. All these years, I had been accompanying her as she grew up in this way. The coat she returned had her perfume scent. I wore it for 7 days straight. The scent gradually faded. I missed her so much, I couldn't control myself from going to see her. She was so beautiful. But if I wasn't the one to accompany her to old age, I didn't want to leave a mark in her life. Clearly, I was a towering tree she could rely on. My little girl, she was so forthright. She said she wanted to secure her position. She was so cute, she couldn't even lie. It's okay, my girl. I'll be with you as you grow up. The Lynn group was our first real practice together. She was very smart, the acquisition was nearly perfect. When I found out she was kidnapped by Nick Lynn, I lost my mind instantly. As soon as the car left the garage, I knew the brakes were faulty. But I couldn't wait for even a second. My girl must be scared. I had to be with her, not a second later. The winding mountain road had deep cliffs on one side and towering cliffs on the other. Even though I tried my best to control the speed, the car inevitably lost control. In the last second before the car went over the cliff, I jumped out. After calling my bodyguards to come, I ran nonstop towards the location Nick Lynn had given me. My shoes wore out, so I took them off and kept running. The gravel road tore the skin off my feet, leaving a trail of bloody footprints. The physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. If something happened to my girl, what would I live for? Fortunately, I made it in time. She was very brave. I was so glad I ran to her without stopping. I finally brought my girl home. She still loves to smoke, still loves to wear very revealing little dresses. Still loves to joke around with friends at the club. It's okay. She should be herself. For everything else, she has me.